no, that's right. Yeah, no, he's so fucking happy.
Yeah, okay. We are
Go for it, Nelson.
good to go, Nelson.
Okay. Well, good evening. I'm Nelson Deuitch, and I'm glad to be back with you again for session 5. We're going to be bouncing around in Samaria and a little bit over in Transjordan, and we'll also get over on the coast dealing with Caesarea and some other places. So we're going to be bouncing around a lot, dealing with a lot of history. But anyway, I'm very thankful to see you and to be able to get started again on this. So let's have some prayer. Our Father, we're thankful that you have given us your word. And we know at times it's not real easy to understand, especially some of the history and the geography and the place names. It's hard to try to pronounce them and to know where in the world they are. But we pray that you'll help us to get a better understanding of all this and to have a greater love for your word. We thank you for the Grand Valley Church here, and glad that Andy and Donna are back from their trip, and we thank you for all your blessings. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So here we go in Samaria, and this is the middle area, of course, of the Holy Land. And so to begin with, we're going to jump over in Transjordan. So this is a place called Machaerus. It may be a place that you've never even heard of before, but there were some very major things that happened here. Now, it's just east of the Dead Sea. So in this picture, you're seeing this hump, of Machaerus. There, of course, was a fair-sized wall on top of it to begin with. But this is where Salome did her dance. And if you remember her mother, Herodotus, and her, they both had a great hatred for a very special man. The man that Jesus said was the greatest man that has ever lived. And that was John the Baptist. And so John the Baptist was taken here by them because Herod Antipas was mad at him too. So they had him here. And Salome did her dance thing. And after the dance, Herod Antipas was being completely stupid. But he said, I'll give you anything you ask for, up to half of my kingdom. Now, who would offer something like that? And then, of course, she went and talked to her mother, and her mother said, we want the head of John the Baptist. And that's exactly what they did. So this is where John the Baptist met his end, was here in Machaerus. Now, Herod Antipas's first wife, now Herodias was his second wife, but his first wife was the daughter of Aretas. And Aretas was the guy actually just a little bit south of this area of Machaerus, and then on up north of this, why he controlled that area. In fact, the apostle Paul, when he became a Christian, why he went to Damascus, of course, and you, I assume, know the story about how he became a Christian. And when he was in Damascus, he left Damascus, and he spent 3 years, when we read in Galatians, and we read in Acts, and we try and put all this together, why he had spent 3 years, I assume, a lot of time in prayer and a lot of time, getting to know the Lord better. And then he came back to Damascus. When he came back to Damascus, the guy that was in charge of that area at that point was Aretas. Aretas was the father of Herodias. So that's the connection here now. So again, we have Herod Antipas, his first wife that he married. Why, she is the daughter of Aretas. Aretas is mentioned in 2 Corinthians, right at the end of chapter 11. And here, Paul tells the story about he knew that Aretas was after him. And so he fled in a basket. They let him down out of a wall in the basket. And so he got away from Aretas, who again was the first wife of Herod Antipas's wife. So all this history fits together. And Josephus is the one that tells us about Aretas. And in 2 Corinthians, it just simply mentions the name Aretas. And of course, he's never mentioned anywhere else in Scripture. But again, this is just another proof of the truthfulness of Scripture. Because when you look at all this, the history and the so forth, it all fits together and makes sense. Now, to tell you just a little bit more about Aretas at this point, and of course, when Herod Antipas got rid of his first wife, of course, Aretas is mad about that. So he got an army together, and he is on his way to attack Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas is back on the not on the other side now of the west side of the Jordan Rift Valley, but he knows that Aretas is coming with an army after him. So he pleaded to the Romans. And the Roman officials with some soldiers, they went and they caught him before he crossed the Jordan River. And they said to him, of course, they just have a small force at that point. But they said to him, you need to go back home and forget this anger that you have. So the Romans, of course, remember, are a very strong power at this point. So he listened to them, and he went back home. So Herod Antipas, he could go, I lucked out today on that. But later, all this is going to come back to haunt him. Because in 39, this is AD 39, why, he decided his wife, this second wife of his, Herodias, said to him, you need more territory. You need to go to Rome and tell them they need to give you more territory. And so in AD 39, he went to Rome, and at that point, the Roman officials said to him, we're going to banish you to Gaul. Gaul is modern France. So he and Herodias, I don't know what kind of property they had back, because they controlled Galilee and they controlled Perea, which was the area over on the Transjordan side. So they lost all that territory and power. So maybe if John the Baptist had still been alive, why, he might have sort of said, well, I'm glad that he got what was coming to him. So all this history and so forth, comes around. But back to Machaerus. First of all, this place, it was a fortress, of course, and you see this little arrow up on top there, and I point to it way up there. There's just a little, you can't hardly see that arrow, but that is Machaerus. So, of course, this picture is being taken from the west side of the Dead Sea. So you're seeing this high cliff area there, and Machaerus is on back up there behind it. So the first person that built that fortress there was Alexander Jannaeus. Alexander Jannaeus now was a descendant of the Maccabees. The Maccabees are actually called by the name Hasmonean. Hasmon, I can't remember whether he was a grandfather or a father of Mattathias Maccabeus and his 5 sons. They are the ones, remember, who in 167 to 164 BC, why, they won back Jerusalem. And they took it back from the Seleucid ruler Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who was a Seleucid ruler, and he was a very nasty man. And he was going to wipe out the Jewish religion. And he came close to doing it, but the Maccabees put the stop to it. So the Maccabees are Hasmoneans. And then this later Hasmonean ruler here, Alexander Jannaeus, he's the one who also did not get along with the Pharisees. He put 800 Pharisees on crosses. And, of course, they are dying on crosses. Then on top of it, he had all of their families brought and put right in front of the cross. Then he killed the families. So this is a guy, again, Judas Maccabeus was a fine man, and Mattathias Maccabeus, but this is a descendant of theirs. And they would have, I think they would have done him in, you know. But anyway, he's the first guy that built Machaerus. And then the Roman general Pompey, who was the one when the Romans took over Israel. They took over Jerusalem in 63 BC, and it was Pompey. Now, Pompey had married Julius Caesar's daughter. So then, of course, later they got into friction among them, and if you know anything about that Roman history, you know, Julius Caesar ended up, I think it was 44 BC, he got killed. Pompey was still alive at that point, but he ended up getting killed not too long after that. But anyway, back to Pompey. He came in 63 BC, and he took over Jerusalem. So now Romans have complete control of Israel. Well, Pompey was the one who ordered the destruction of Machaerus. And then Herod the Great, he came into the picture, and Herod the Great rebuilt it. And then, of course, his son, Herod Antipas, after Herod the Great died in 4 BC, Herod Antipas took it over. This is the same guy again now, remember, who he was the one who ordered the beheading of John the Baptist. So all this fits together. Well, after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, which we're going to be dealing with that big time next week in our 6th session, after the fall of Jerusalem, the Romans, of course, thought, we have done in the Jews. There's nothing left of them. Then they found out, oh, there's still a couple fortresses. One of them was Herodium. Remember, that was one of the very first pictures that I gave you. That's just a little bit south of Jerusalem, and Herod had built a beautiful place there. Remember I showed you that stairway going up? I thought I recently read that there were 200 marble steps going up there. Now again, you saw those steps going up, but Herod the Great was a beautiful and marvelous builder. So anyway, the Romans, of course, they went down, and very quickly they took Herodium, and then they went to Machaerus. And when they got to Machaerus, let me get the next picture here. So back to, this is another view of looking at Machaerus. You're actually looking now at the west side of the Dead Sea. And if you can see the mountains, those are mountains back over there. So, it's high on both sides of this Dead Sea. Well, anyway, the Romans are here at Machaerus. They've already defeated Jerusalem and everything, so this is just a mop-up situation. It ain't going to take them very long, to take this place. Well, in the meantime, there was an 18-year-old boy. He went outside the wall and went down, and he's going to attack the Roman army by himself. Teenagers again, what in the world? They get into all kinds of things, Well, anyway, of course, he got captured real quick. And then the Romans took him, and they went up closer to the wall up there, where the people up there on the wall could real easily see him, and they're getting all ready to crucify this 18-year-old guy. This 18-year-old guy was well liked by the people, living up there in Machaerus. And when they saw that they were going to crucify him, of course, I'm sure they already knew that there's no way that we're going to defeat this Roman army down here. It may take them a day or two or something, but, they're going to get us. So at this point, they threw in the towel. And they said, we give. And so anyway, it ended up, of course, getting destroyed again because the Romans destroyed Machaerus. Now, this is the top of Machaerus, and I don't know how well you can see this cement floor there, but this was built by Herod the Great. Everything he did was marvelous in the area of building. When you read what Josephus tells about him as a builder, it just boggles your mind because, of course, he ended up building the temple of Jerusalem. He had worked, several years on that to rebuild that, but he built places all over. He even did buildings in Athens, there's Tyre, Sidon, Tyre, and then Byblos. In Byblos, he did buildings there, and so he built places all over the place. Where in the world he got the money to do all that, I don't have a clue. But Josephus tells us, that, again, he's one of the greatest builders that there's ever been, in the world. But anyway, when you see some of this, like at Machaerus, why, he built things in a marvelous way. This was his ritual bath in his palace. So these are the steps going down into the ritual bath. So again, I have not seen these. We were not there at all, but I'm sure, of course you have to remember, we're talking a whole bunch of years ago, but you can still tell what a marvelous builder that he was. Now let's jump to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. We're going to be jumping all around now. Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, remember when they first entered the first place that Joshua led the forces of Israel, the first place they went to was Jericho. And we're going to come to that, later. But at Jericho, of course, remember, they marched around the city 7 times, and boom, the walls came down. And, of course, then they had to win battles, several other places in the area. But then they finally got to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And when they got there, then the Lord had said to Joshua, you need to read the book of the law to them. So Israel, there's guesses that there was probably like 2.5 million or more of them. So half of them are gathered on Mount Gerizim, which is on your left there as you're looking at this picture. And then on your right is Mount Ebal. And the other, so you've got 6 tribes on one side, and you've got 6 tribes on the other side. So you're talking about, over 1 million people, sitting there. And at first, when you think, now 1 million people, I've never been to any gathering when there was anything, like that. I've seen like 50,000 people or something like that in some of the stadiums, so forth. But when you're talking well over 1 million people, you think, well, how in the world could you ever get there? And how would they ever hear? They didn't have big microphones, so forth. But they have actually done studies, and you can get somebody who has a good voice speaking. They can stand in the middle of this area. It's a natural amphitheater, and it can be heard. So Joshua read the law to them. Now, scholars debate, what did he read? Did he read the law? When you first mention that to Jewish people right away, they would say, well, that's the first 5 books. Genesis, through Deuteronomy. That's the first 5 books. Did he read the whole 5 books there? There are scholars who believe that he only read the book of Deuteronomy, which really is a basic summary of those 5 books. So again, I don't know exactly what he read, but he read the law to them here. And then right in the middle of this, of course, right now you're seeing a modern city that is there now. This is the modern city of Nablus today. In New Testament times, this area was called Sychar. So you remember Jesus meeting the woman at the well at Sychar? So that's where this took place. And of course, there wasn't all this housing in there at that point. But this is where the ancient city of Shechem was. So Shechem became the worship place. And that was natural at first for them to, have a place of worship here. So here again shows you the 2 mountains here. The one on the left, Mount Gerizim, the one on the right, Mount Ebal. One of them, Mount Ebal, is actually at least 100 to 200 feet taller than Mount Gerizim. Mount Gerizim was the place where the blessings were on that side. The blessings were read on that side, and on the other side, Mount Ebal, the cursing was read there. Last Sunday, we had a sermon from our minister in Newmarket, and he talked about warnings. And all of us know about warnings. You see all kinds of warnings. But the Old Testament and the New Testament are full of warnings. And the Israelites, they heard both the good side about the blessings if they follow the Lord, but they also heard, if they don't follow the Lord, what was going to happen to them. So you can read this, and I give you the passage of Scripture here, Deuteronomy 11:22 through 30, and also chapter 27, 1 to 28, and then Joshua 8:30 to 35. You can read about that. So this here is not an actual real picture. This is a made-up picture, but it does a good job of showing some things. So you can see in this, let me point out, so here's Shechem, and right here is Mount Gerizim, then there's Mount Ebal. Now, if you were in Jerusalem Of course, Jerusalem didn't exist at this time. Well, it was it existed. I think it was called Nablus or something like that. I can't remember the name of what it was back then. But if you were there in that area and you wanted to go to Galilee, the easiest way to go is staying right in the central hill country and keep right on going. And so you would go right through this area right here. So you would walk right by these two mountains and you'd keep going right on up like that. And you'd get up there in the plain of Esdrelon, and then you could get to the Sea of Galilee. So this is the shortest distance. But in Jesus' day, the Jewish people did not take that route because they did not like the Samaritans. The Samaritans controlled this. The Samaritans, they built their place of worship on Mount Gerizim. And they still worship on top of there. I saw a story, about them. I assume it was fairly recent. Anyway, they said that there are about 800 of them that are up there. And there are 3 males for every, 3 or 4 males for every 1 female. So they're not going to be around too long, is what a lot of people, are saying. But they have been worshiping there for a long time. Now, they, like the Sadducees, they only believed in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And that's all they follow, is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Of course, they believe they were the original ones going way back, but they're having a tough time staying alive right now as worshiping people. But of course, they were worshiping there when Jesus was there, because remember when he met the woman of the well, Shechem is now called Sychar in New Testament times. When he met her there at the well, of course, he doesn't have anything to draw water, and he begins to talk to her about her family situation, and she soon realized, this guy knows I've had 5 husbands, and the guy I'm living with right now, he's not my husband. And so she started believing in him, and hopefully you know the rest of the story there. So this supposedly is the well of where the woman of Sychar was. Whether it actually is the one or not, that's another story. I just took a picture of, there's another well in this area. I don't know exactly where that well was, but I just have a better picture of thinking that may have looked more like the well, But again, I have no idea. All I know is Jesus talked to her at the well there at Sychar. So, well, let's talk about Samaria. Samaria is, first of all, they were gathering at Shechem. But Shechem, remember, is right down in that valley. There are no walls there or anything. There's no protection. So, of course, the northern kingdom, they didn't want that to be their capital. So they moved not too far from there. You can find Samaria. So I drew a little map, and gave you a little map so you can sort of try and find these places. If you can find the Shechem there, and then look up a little bit, it's a little bit more to the north and to the west, and is the capital city of Samaria. I could really not find any good pictures of this. This is a very old picture, and some of these old pictures are much better because you don't have all this modern buildup, that has happened in the last 50 years, in this area. But this is a picture here of Samaria. This was built by Omri. Omri, his son was Ahab. You remember Ahab and Jezebel. So that's the time of Elijah. But Omri built this city, and then, of course, his son Ahab took over, and they built a very strong city. The wall that was built here was only 5 feet thick. Now, by standards back then, a wall of 5 feet, that was nothing special. But this wall was so strongly put together that the scholars say, it was the strong, without talking about Jerusalem later, that Herod the Great built and so forth. But especially back in these Old Testament times, that's the strongest wall that existed. Well, here we are in Samaria again. So this is Samaria, modern Samaria. And of course, you see the modern buildings there. And you see some greenery there. So many places, when you see pictures here, you look at places like this and you say, you couldn't grow anything there. But surprisingly, you can grow stuff in some of those areas that look like there's no way you could build anything. But you can see there's definitely some greenery here, and things are growing. So ancient Samaria was a very strong walled city. And later, Herod the Great rebuilt it all. And he renamed it Sabas. And he rebuilt the whole place again. He built a temple to Caesar Augustus here. He built so many Caesar Augustus temples. He built one, remember when we first started talking about at the base of Mount Hermon. Remember the pictures of Mount Hermon? There was a temple there to Caesar. And this was just another one that Herod built. So where again he got all the money to do all this building, I don't know. But now we're jumping to Caesarea. So Caesarea, of course, is right on the Mediterranean Sea. And Caesarea was built marvelously by Herod the Great. And here's where I personally, witnessed the marvelous way that Herod the Great built stuff. Because this theater right here that you're looking at, Herod the Great built this theater. And it is still a marvelous theater. Now, they have metal. Can you see these metal things? Now, there were no metal railings there when Herod the Great built it. But I was sitting up. I got. I'm jumping way ahead here. I was sitting about right there. And when I sat down on that, this place is well over 2,000 years old, And I'm sitting down, and it is carved out. This is solid stone, but it's carved out nice. Actually, it was quite comfortable. And of course, our guide was telling us about things that happened here. Well, this again just shows you how marvelous this one. This probably holds at least 8,000 people. And they, of course, still use this very much today. People gather there. But on that, this is the place where People would be putting on the shows, or the people would be speaking. And then right close by is the Mediterranean Sea. So you almost feel, of course, I was a lot younger then but I just felt like, oh, I could just run right down and jump into the Mediterranean Sea right here. But Herod the Great, I got to tell you about, this is the place of the 4 P's. Philip, the deacon, was from here. Remember, he is going down south. There's this Ethiopian eunuch is in this chariot, and he's going along, and once Philip is right beside of him, he's reading something in the Old Testament. He doesn't understand it. I've been there a whole bunch of times, too. I don't understand what in the world this is saying here. And Philip said to him, would you like me to explain that to you? Get in my chariot. And then they came to some water, and which is unusual, remember. Yes, you have the Mediterranean Sea over there, but they're not right by the Mediterranean Sea. But they came to a place where there was some water. And he said, see, here is some water. He said to Philip, why can't I be baptized? And chariot stopped, and he got baptized. But Philip was from Caesarea. He had 4 daughters that were prophetess. So they lived here in the city of Caesarea. Paul spent 2 years in prison here. 2 years before they ended up sending him on to Rome to spend some more time, in jail. But the latter part of Paul's life, he spent 2 years here. Pontius Pilate. This is where Pontius Pilate lived for 10 years, from 26 to 36 AD, remember, we're talking. There's no way Pontius Pilate was going to live in Jerusalem. Too hot there, and there could be problems all the time. So he lived here, and of course, if you know the geography here, which place do you want to live in? This is beautiful weather here. It's almost room temperature year-round there. Nice breezes come in off of the sea. It's beautiful and so forth. So that's where Pontius Pilate lived. The very interesting thing to me is they found a stone with a name on it. And guess what the name was? Pontius Pilate. So that, I can't remember. That's been a fairly recent, not like 20 years ago or so. I'd have to look that up. But, it's been a fairly recent finding that in their diggings and so forth, they found this thing, and it said Pontius Pilate. Again, the scripture is true. Well, the ancient ruins here are something. Herod built all of this. Here's where I mentioned about the plaque. But you so quickly see Herod's marvelous building here. These ancient ruins just show his marvelous nature. But the thing I want to point out to you, now you see some of these stones there. Now some of those, I'm certain that even if we're all real young, you don't want to pick those things up and carry them very far. They're pretty good sized stones. But these stones are nothing in comparison to some of them that Herod the Great built. Got a book right here. This is the Great Roman-Jewish War. This was written by Josephus. And so Josephus wrote these. These are 7 books in this. Now, we call this a book. But the way they have everything separated in here, we would call them long chapters. But in book 1, why, it tells you about the buildings here. Now, they did not, on all the coast of Israel, they did not have a place where ships could be safe. The wind many times, was coming there along, and so there's no safe harbor there back in the time of Christ. So Herod the Great built a semicircular one. Some of the stones that he used in building that were 50 feet long, 9 feet in one dimension, and 10 feet on the other. So 10 feet, I think it was the height, but I can't remember which one was one. One of them is 9 feet, the other is 10 feet, and it's 50 feet long. Can you imagine a stone like that? And you know where he put that? Out in the Mediterranean Sea to form that semicircle. So there were a bunch of those stones there. Now, I remember, reading that, and right away I think, now, Josephus, you're you're stretching this a whole lot. But we know for sure that in the temple that he built in Jerusalem, several of those stones, they are 25 feet or longer, and again, these same dimensions, like height and width. These are gigantic stones. How in the world did they do that? I don't have a clue, but they did it. So, as I told you, he's a marvelous builder. There's a Roman aqueduct that brought water from Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel, as you're standing there in Caesarea, I can't remember exactly what the distance is. We're talking like 10, 15 miles or something like that. But, it's a distance. But, of course, you can see it very easily from Caesarea. But they need water here. And so they brought water all the way from Mount Carmel. I actually got up and walked along on that aqueduct because, when you're younger, and you look at something like this, my wife, she didn't go up. But I had to get up there on top of that and walk along, up on top of it. So this is another picture, of that same one, but it went for a long ways. Of course, a lot of it's been destroyed. So, but again, this just shows you Herod the Great, the builder. So, here's a Colosseum there in Caesarea. So, he built all kinds of stuff there. This is a hippodrome. So right there, when I told you where I was sitting in the theater, that held about 8,000 people, right beside of this is this hippodrome. And we walked along, on that too. They would do horse and chariot races here. And the seating would hold about 20,000 people. So, let me get going here. So this is another aqueduct. I really don't know exactly where this was, but I just saw a picture of it and just wanted to put another picture in. But the Romans, they built these aqueducts all over the place. So now let's leave Caesarea and let's go to Dothan. So Dothan, here you see Hebron down here, and now we're really going back in time. We're going back to the time, you had Abram, who became Abraham, and then Isaac, and then you had Jacob. And Jacob, of course, had 12 sons. And so we know a fair amount about, those 12 sons. The favorite son, of course, was the guy with the beautiful garment, wearing it around. The brothers, he had a younger brother at that point. He's 17 years old at this point, what we're talking about here. So his father, Benjamin is only 6 years old at this point. So, of course, he's just a young boy at home. But all the other brothers, the 10 of them, they're all up watching the sheep and taking care of the sheep. So they thought, the father thought they're in Shechem. So he said to Joseph, I want you to go to Shechem and find out about your brothers, how things are going. So he ended up in Dothan, because when he got to Shechem, why, of course, right there, they said to him, well, they're not here, but we heard they were going to go to Dothan. So they went on up to Dothan. This is 80 miles between Hebron. Now remember, Abraham, he lived to begin with in Chaldea. But then he ended up, God called him, and then he ended up in Israel. But Hebron is where he spent his time living in Israel. So Hebron is, now in this map it shows Jerusalem. But of course, the people that do these maps are like me. They get things mixed up sometimes, Jerusalem is not in existence at this point. Yes, there's a city there, but it's not called Jerusalem. So how did Joseph go? He went right by what would be much later would be Jerusalem, and Bethel. He went up to Shechem, and then he went to Dothan. And of course, I assume you all know the story. Genesis chapters 37 to 50 deal with this. There's chapter 38 gets into a whole nother subject, but that is a marvelous story. Every time I read that story, as I think about Joseph and all this, what happened to him and how all this went by. Anyway, you know what happened to him. They ended up throwing him in a pit. They're talking about killing him, and then some of them came up. Now Reuben, the oldest of them, he has a plan. I'm going to rescue him. But of course, when he came back, the other brothers had already sold him. And he ended up in slavery down in Egypt. And so here's this young 17-year-old, and hopefully, again, you know this story, but read it again. It just touches your heart every time you read it. Well, he ended up there, and before long, he is the number one man in the country. Now, he's not actually number one. There's Pharaoh. But he's the guy who's running the country. So he's second in command, but he's number one in taking care of things. He's 39 years old at this point, which means he has not seen his brothers for 22 years. And guess what? It's in the second. First of all, they had 7 years of plenty. And then they're going to have 7 years of things are bad. It's in that second year of the 7-year one of the bad time. So during that time, why, of course, Abraham says to his sons, I hear there's food down there. Go there and get some. And guess what? Those, Benjamin, of course, isn't with them. But so there's 10 of them. And so they end up down there, and they're standing right in front of their brother. They don't recognize him. Because, again, it's been 22 years since they've seen him. He is not dressed like them. His whole mannerisms and everything is Egyptian. And so they don't recognize him at all. Now, he understands exactly what they're saying. He knows exactly who they are, but they don't know him. And again, you know, you have to go through all that with him. Well, that's a marvelous story, but all that took place, but it started in Dothan. So this is Dothan. Now, those are modern buildings there, but the hill up on top, that's Dothan. Exactly where the cave is, or that hole, that pit in the ground where they threw young Joseph. Why, of course, we have no idea about any of that. Now, one thing I do want to point out to you in this picture, I don't know whether you can tell very well, but those houses right there, if you can see these pictures well, they all have flat roofs. It's amazing that so many of the homes, these are modern homes, you know, they're still flat roofs. Remember Jesus, where is, I'm going blank, Capernaum. He's in Capernaum, and there's 4 guys that show up with a guy on a pallet. What did they do? They can't get in the house because there's so many people in there. So they went up the outside stairway, because that's the way they built the houses then. And they went up on top of the roof, ripped a hole in the roof, lowered them down. And that's still the way they're building houses. Remember, they have no rain for 6 months. And that's a key reason why they have flat roofs. So now let's go to Bethel. Bethel was just north of what, you know, later would be Jerusalem. And so it's only 12 miles or 20 kilometers northwest of what later, you know, was going to be Jerusalem. But we're talking back much further before Jerusalem, you know, came into existence. This is the valley that separates the northern kingdom from the southern kingdom. So the northern kingdom ended up being called Samaria, and then the southern kingdom, that was Judah. And Judah swallowed up Benjamin. So anyway, you go down through a pretty good valley here coming up. And again, if you're coming from the north, you're going to go up to Jerusalem. You come down through this valley and you have to go up again, and then you're going to go up even more as you're going further. So you're going up to Jerusalem. That's the geography. So the Bethel area, this is looking south from Bethel. So you can see how it goes up, you know, if you were going to go to Jerusalem, you were in that area today. You see all the rocks there. Remember, I told you there are rocks everywhere. You want to throw a rock at somebody, you're not going to have to go very far to try and find them. So another view here, you see that valley right there that separated the north from the south here. So this is what back after you had David, you know, being the king, and then David had a son Solomon, and then Solomon had a son Rehoboam. And it was in the time of Rehoboam when he first became king. Why, there's some friction between the northern tribes and him. And of course, he made a bad decision at that point, and Jeroboam came into the picture. And Jeroboam then ended up becoming the king of the northern kingdom, Samaria. And you can understand why you have this separation here, because these valleys, they create, separation here. So anyway, I want to take you back to the time of Esau and Jacob. Remember, their dad is Isaac. He's not in very good shape. He can't see very well. And of course, Deborah fixed it up so that we're going to make the younger son, they're twins, but Esau was the oldest. And of course, Deborah loved Jacob far more. And so Deborah fixed it up so that Jacob ends up getting the number one spot. So he's number one now. And of course, when Esau came in to get his blessing, and found out, oh no, it's already been given, he is one mad brother. And so Jacob, of course, had to flee. So Jacob took a run, and he went all the way to Haran. And if you know the story in Genesis, about all this, why you know how he ended up getting his wife and so forth. But he's going right through this area. As he's going through this area, why, he had a dream at Bethel. He had a dream that he saw angels ascending and descending from heaven on a ladder. So this is the area, again, where this takes place. Of course, when we're starting to talk about Bethel, why, that's much later in the history, as the history is moving forward. Well, let's talk about Shiloh. Shiloh was the place where the Ark of the Covenant ended up being placed. So when they first got into the Promised Land, why, one of the first things, remember, they did was they had the reading of the law. And we talked about that, at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. But not far from that area is a place called Shiloh. So this is where the Ark of the Covenant was put, and it was there for probably at least 300 years. Now, it's not easy to try to determine exactly how long, it was there. But it was there from the time, that of course, the Israelites had to win some territory before they could find a place where now it's safe to put the Ark of the Covenant. But they put it in Shiloh, and it stayed there until you get down to the time of Samuel. Remember Eli the priest. He had two sons, Phineas and what was it Hophni or something like that? Those two guys, they were wicked guys, and they were sleeping with the women right in front of the temple area, and they were taking food that wasn't theirs, and they were just being mean guys. Well, they came up with the idea, they're fighting with the Philistines, and they're not winning. So they came up with the idea, let's take the Ark of the Covenant down to where they're fighting. Well, the Ark ended up in the hands of the Philistines. The Philistines got it to, I can't remember which city first, but down those Philistine cities, why, they have it in one of their temples to Dothan, And of course, when they put it in there, the next morning when they entered in there, boom, Dothan is right on his face. So they put Dothan back up again, and then the next morning when they came back in, boom, Dothan is down on his face again, and this time his head's busted off, and his arms and hands are busted off. Well, and then there were a lot of plagues, that were starting. They were having tumors like crazy and so forth. So pretty soon they realized, we got to get rid of this thing, So finally some of their priests said, well, put it on a wagon, Get two of these, what were they? I don't know whether they were oxen that were pulling this. And they had just had young calves and their mothers, and they're not going to leave their calves. And they tied up their calves right there. But then what did those animals do? Boom, they started going, and they went right straight going back up into the Israelite territory. And of course, to the Philistines at that point, they were very glad to see that thing leave. But from that point on, it no longer was in Shiloh. So this shows the possible location of the tabernacle. Again, you see the rugged territory. This is not the most beautiful area, Israel, this small country, it has all different kinds of country. You can see stuff like this. Then you can be on the plain of Esdraelon, and it is just so nice and beautiful and so forth, but all kinds of terrain there. This is a large pottery jar that they found at Shiloh. This is a very ancient jar. This, they think, probably goes back to the time of Jesus. So it's an old one. I remember seeing some of them in Jerusalem, that again, they looked like this. Now, why in the world did they make it with a point like that? And the ones that I saw in Jerusalem, they were probably, a good 3 feet tall. So can you imagine a jar like this and the thing's full? Well, how do you keep the thing from tipping over? I'm sure they had some sort of mechanism that they put it into. But, okay, the Valley of Ajalon. So in that little map, that I showed you right here, you have the Valley of Ajalon. This again is a valley. So that's the valley right there. This is one of the main, if you're on the Mediterranean Sea coast, this is one of the main ways that you can go to Jerusalem. You go up through this, and then, of course, you have to keep going up and up until you get up in the area. But this was the place where Joshua and Israel defeated 5 kings here. 5 of these Philistine kings. And they were winning the battle big time, but they knew it was going to be dark before soon. So Joshua says, we need more sunlight. So Joshua prayed, and God caused the sun and the moon to stand still for another day. And they really handed it to those Philistines on that day. So, but this flat plain here, this has seen a lot of battles over the years. This is Jericho. So now we're down pretty close to the Dead Sea. You're only about 7 miles or so from the Jordan River, and you're not much further than that to the top of the north end of the Dead Sea. There's some very ancient things here, but when you look at some of this stuff, you really can't get a picture as to what it was like, when Joshua first came in with his forces, and they walked around this for 7 days. Only Rahab, remember, and her family survived from that. This is the Jericho area. You think, well, what can you grow there? But again, there are things that grow here. Remember, Jesus called Zacchaeus. Where is Zacchaeus? He's in a sycamore tree. And you can see there are still trees, growing there in that harsh climate, as you think for growing things. And this is where Jesus met a blind beggar by the name of Bartimaeus. And of course, Bartimaeus, when he heard Jesus was going by, why, he called out to him. Well, this is in modern Israel, where this is some agricultural land in the West Bank area. And so I've shown you pictures of real rough areas, but there are places, where it's very nice. Of course, modern Israel, this is a section of land that they took for military purposes. So modern day problems there are just, you never know. War can, we've all witnessed that within our own lifetime. There's been wars there all the time between the Palestinians and the Jews. So, whoop. So this is our last slide. This is back to Jericho again. When you're standing at Jericho, why, you can look up at the cliffs there and you see this monastery. This is a Catholic monastery. I never wanted to be a monk. I do like at times being all alone and be able to read and so forth, but I like being with people too, and so forth. But this is a Catholic monastery up there, and I don't know how those people do it, but they're up there. Now, I want to tell you one more story. We've gone a little longer than what I hoped, but one more story about Jericho. Jericho they had a pool there, and in this pool, first of all, Herod the Great, he had 10 wives, according to Josephus, and Josephus also says he has 9 wives. So I don't know which one is right, but his favorite wife was Mariamne. Mariamne was of Hasmonean blood, meaning she's from the Maccabees. And the Israelites always loved people who were from the Maccabees because of what the Maccabees had done for them. And so she's very popular with the people. And she has a 17-year-old brother. And she wants her brother to be made high priest. So Herod the Great kicked out the high priest. And now this was being done a lot at this point. The Romans did this. Herod the Great did this. There are a whole bunch of remember, a high priest was high priest for life in the Old Testament, but not now in the New Testament era. So Jonathan was his name. Jonathan was made high priest at 17 years old. He put on the sacred garments, and he's doing the ceremony and so forth. And the people, when they saw him, they just fell in love with him. Because, again, he's of Maccabean blood. They are cheering him, and they are so excited about him. And Herod the Great, he is looking at him like, oh, what have I done? This guy's going to take over for me. So what did he do? He had some of these people called Gauls. Jonathan is down in Jericho. He's in this pool So he's at the local swimming pool, you know, and they're frolicking in the water. These other guys are pushing him underwater, and they're holding him down for just a little longer. Then they'd let him up, but then they held him down long enough that that did end him. Now, Mariamne, at this point, she is super mad at him because he has already killed her grandfather. He's ended up, she had 3 sons. One of them died in Rome. He was a student there, and he just died of natural causes. The other 2 sons, they both studied in Rome, and they came back as just fine-looking young men. Again, they were very popular, but Herod the Great had them killed. Josephus again tells us all these stories. So for Mariamne, why, she lost her grandfather, she lost her brother, she lost her 2 sons, and then she lost her life himself. He killed her. But then he ended up lamenting that big time. So this was another side of this guy, you know, who was a builder. So anyway, next week, why, we're going to be dealing with the fall of Jerusalem. So I'll look forward to seeing you with our session 6. So, okay.